Hey people, welcome back to the channel. This is a story in which Madara is Naruto's grandfather. He implanted his and Hashirama's cells into Naruto and trained him, which made him extremely strong. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you enjoy the video, leave a comment if you want to suggest fanfic. Check the description for credits and support the creator of the story. So let us begin. Chapter 41. End Hashirama looked down on the world. It was so much quiet, however, there were many tensions that lied within the corners of most villages. From where he looked, beneath the imperial palace, the imperial kingdom lied still. There was so much peace within the city that it gave him hope that this world would finally stop with its wars and learn to live in peaceful ways. The people within Naruto's kingdom were like one big happy family, a clan in the shinobi ways. The main and branch family get along. No one was a slave to the other, and leaders didn't show favoritism. The kingdom was stable. However, Hashirama didn't actually like Naruto's attitude in all these. When his underlings ask him how to proceed on to the future, he merely tells them to do as they like. It isn't supposed to be like that for a leader. A leader is supposed to have vision, and be the driver to move his people forward. The leader is the one supposed to take charge of everything, and lead his people. Naruto did things differently. He didn't actually do anything, and that was what worried the sage. Naruto permitted those he worked with to do anything they felt is right. He was even positive that even if it was something that Naruto wouldn't do himself, he still wouldn't forbid them from doing it. As long as they felt it was right, he would allow them to do as they please. What eased his worries was the fact that those people Naruto had decided to work with were good people and great leaders. He wasn't completely sure about Nagato and Gurren, but he had no doubt with Mei and Gaara. The two were good people before his eyes, and he believed that those people could do so much in this world. If a world was to be shaped by those two, then he wouldn't have to worry much. Perhaps visiting those two would do well. Seeing them in person and speaking to them would clear some thoughts. However, Naruto would have to agree to something like that. Hashirama turned around from the edge of Naruto's Sky Island. He felt Naruto's wholeness return to the throne room. It was best he get some things off his chest before anything happens. The legendary sage blurred into existence within the throne room. Naruto was sitting comfortably, staring at him with impassiveness. Naruto is able to reveal himself to other people, however, his real body always remained here, eyes closed. It wasn't that he was sleeping. Hashirama had once tried to speak to him and he got a response. The response wasn't just the one he liked. He guessed that being omnipresent changed Naruto in some ways, and it took some effort for him to maintain his form without causing destruction. Nature was deadly powerful, and since Naruto controlled natural chakra around the world, it would prove deadly if he suddenly slipped. Since the natural chakra is one with him, it would react to his mood. So far, Naruto seems to be handling the pressure quite well. Speak your mind, Hashirama, Naruto stated in a slight inviting tone. He knew that the sage had some things to say. Over the past days, the sage has been staring at him inventively as though trying to get into his head to read what he was going to do next. It must be worrying for the sage, as a part of him feared that he may one day wake up on the wrong side of the bed and decide to go berserk around the world, destroying anything he didn't like. For someone possessing immeasurable power, turning the world into war zone was a simple trick to him, and Hashirama feared that the sage couldn't quite trust him. If there was something Naruto had discovered about himself, it was that he was somewhat predictable. So much that Hashirama shouldn't really be worried. Naruto could deal with both Iwa and Kumogakure if they threatened to do something to his country. As of now, he dealt with all major threats to his country and he didn't have anyone to rival him in terms of power. Hashirama wouldn't be wrong to say that he was supreme without an equal. The sage became thoughtful, trying to think of words to say. Naruto spoke. Words were bubbling inside of him, his tongue enjoyed clicking too much these days. He didn't understand it fully, but he found talking to be a joy and words just seemed to seep out of his lips without complaints. Hashirama, You don't think highly of me. It wasn't a question that Naruto put to the sage, it was a statement. I don't particularly care for what you think of me. I hardly care for what anyone thinks of me. I have told you before, talking with you is always fun, and so I will talk with you. I know what you want to say to me. Hagoromo didn't even twitch. The holes inside his ears became large again, and the Rinnegan zoomed onto Naruto's lips. He didn't want to miss anything. He would listen to the voice of Naruto while reading his lips. The eyes of the blonde would reveal nothing to him. He didn't seem to hold any emotions inside of his eyes. What sticks to the definition of a human, Hagoromo? Naruto asked. You aren't something that defines a human. The sage started tonelessly, but before he could continue on, Naruto spoke again. He wasn't satisfied with the man's introduction. There is your problem, Hagoromo, Naruto started quietly. You don't look at the world in the right way. Your entire outlook of the world was befitting for a sage before I came to existence. But now you look at me, the dread I could birth within the hearts of humans, my power. My existence has warped your thinking and now you mostly focus on me. Why don't you just treat me as an invisible factor that can't bend the ways of men forcefully? If you begin to look at things like that, everything will change, and you won't obsess so much over what I could do next. Despite being on checkmate, you are still trying to find a way to get back to the game. But I must ask you, what is it that you want to fight for? Hagoromo narrowed his eyes. He couldn't put Naruto's existence as an unproblematic factor. He couldn't do that, no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't. Naruto was also the one who made the shinobi world what it was today, and he would continue to influence it as long as he was alive. Even though he didn't actually do anything, his existence shaped so many things. It was just impossible to disregard Naruto's existence, not in this world. Perhaps Naruto wasn't saying that to him, even though the words read that way. Could he be telling him that he shouldn't worry about him, Naruto, doing something to change the world in a forceful way? Could he be saying that he would just continue to exist without forcing things to be in his liking? What was there to guarantee that he won't snap one day and change things? Hagoromo shook his head. It was impossible for someone like Naruto to snap. His mind was a combination of two great minds, and he was certain that there were fail-safes or set to activate if something like that happened. Yes, Naruto would go that far if it was something that he was doing because of frustrations. He, however, wouldn't put in fail-safe if it was something he'd been planning from the beginning. Your existence is a factor that can't be discarded. No matter how many times I wish you didn't exist, I can't erase my thoughts of you, I can't. You are a factor that is and will always be, as long as you breathe, Hagoromo finally responded in a firm tone. As long as Naruto lived, and nothing changed, he would always be worried. But as it seems, he would be worried for all eternity since the Emperor was immortal. The immortality means that he cannot die, and his existence will always influence the shinobi world. If only there was a way to ensure that the Emperor could live for a given time. I see, Naruto said. Well, that will become a problem for you since I can't be killed. Not even you can do it. The words left Naruto's mouth smoothly before he paused for a moment. There was no human who could kill him, let alone fatally wound him. He was a being beyond human comprehension. The power he held was far too great for any human to even begin to measure up to. Even if Madara were to return from the dead, again, he wouldn't do anything to him. Continuing from where he left off, Naruto spoke again. Since you can't look past my existence, I'll tell you this, Hagoromo, humans are beings filled with emotions, a heart, body and soul. Emotions form a strong basis for the human mind to think. Although many call themselves emotionless, emotions influence every action they take. One may discard emotions, but as long as you once had them, traces of their existence will always remain. People who lose their emotions are often called demons because of their lack of emotions. Emotions make humans what they are. Every human has emotions, some just choose to show them while others choose against it. The ideals and environment of a human will determine how they will interpret emotions and how they will allow them to influence their choices. People are unique because of their ideals, interpretation of emotions, and definition of what is right and wrong. A human is a being that is full of ideals, emotions, governed by a set of principles of what falls under the concept of what is right and wrong. Hagoromo looked at Naruto carefully after he heard those words. What did this have to do with anything? As far as he was concerned, Naruto claimed to have lost all emotions. What did emotions have to do with him, then, if he claimed to dismiss them? Where are you going with this? Hagoromo questioned in a tone of seriousness. If you take the emotions of a human, you are left with a shell of what used to be a human being. Emotions form an integral part of humanity, and without them, a person can't live in society and be accepted wholly. Naruto started calmly. I say I have lost all emotions, but that is not the entire truth. As long as a part of me remains human, I'll have emotions. The emotions just won't affect me whatsoever. As you are, you can't live with other people. You can't live as a human in the human world. Whether you have emotions or not, it means little to you. You aren't the one to allow emotions to cloud your judgment, Hagoromo stated, catching a glimpse of what Naruto was trying to say. The day Naruto became one with the Jubi, he lost his humanity. He may have some bits of emotions because he was alive as a human for some time. The other thing that made Naruto a danger to humanity was with the way he handled emotions. Yes, he had some difficulties in understanding them, and he also failed to properly show them. Naruto couldn't show affection properly because he didn't know how. But that was Naruto of the past. Becoming one with his mother, Hagoromo figured that Naruto inherited his mother's experiences with emotions. If there was something that his mother wasn't afraid of showing, it was her emotions. That attribute must have been imprinted within Naruto's soul, and if that is so, the Emperor must be keeping them under the table. A being full of mysteries such as Naruto could do something like that quite easily. Yes, I can't live as a human in this state, and this becomes a problem I'd not thought I would be forced to solve, Naruto admitted. I'm not human, with the little emotions I have, I can't live in society. The God part of me sees most human activities as trivial, and refuses to do anything that is possible to humans. I find it hard to do things that a mere human can do. I think they are beneath me. Hagoromo wasn't encouraging in his response. With that kind of attitude, I'm not surprised. You carried your pride high above all things, and your ego is in abundance as your chakra. You are smart, but sometimes your arrogance and pride stand in the way. The sage shook his head. A compliment from my predecessor. Naruto looked amused. Perhaps it is my arrogance and pride that has left me in this position. I did tell you that things moved a bit faster than I'd anticipated. You see, Hagoromo, my plan was to eventually become like this, however, not before I'd lived happily as a human. I was powerful and my personality was set in a way that I could live at Konoha being its leader, even though I hated those people, and still be happy. Even if Konoha's people didn't approve of me, it wouldn't matter. Being as powerful as I was, they wouldn't oppose me. Being leader of Konoha, I could teach those filthy humans some humility, and if I failed after a few years, I would relinquish my humanity and teach them the hard way. The Imperial Kingdom would be where I would spend my days after Konoha, after being happy. However, with Madara's early return, I was forced to act quick. That man could have killed me if I'd not consumed Kagaya. Another factor that forced me to act quick was that I'd actually grown impatient with Konoha. How did he expect to live happily when surrounded by people who hated him? Hagoromo thought, shaking his head. So you are now left with a dilemma. You aren't human, and you skipped a part that is important to you. To be able to live the part you skipped, you have to somehow become human again. Hagoromo became thoughtful for a few moments before continuing. Well, I guess things did turn out better. You can be happier in your kingdom than you would have been if you were at Konoha. A problem still persists though, how will you become human again? Naruto nodded, the sage was spot on. Before we get to that, I want to make the effort to make you understand something. I don't plan to enslave all humans under my authority. I'll admit that even as a human I had a god complex, but I respect free will. Just as emotions form an integral part of humanity, free will also does that. Once a person loses his free will, he is more of a tool than anything. My desire is not for a world full of tools, but of a world full of humans with humility. I can be called a hypocrite for saying that since display little humility, but I don't care. The imperial prison, the laws you created for your kingdom and you putting Mei and Gaara in your council. Hagoromo mused loudly. I see. I think I'm beginning to understand now. Now, then, allow me to explain to you how I can become a human again. Capital of the Imperial Kingdom. For 3 whole days Kuretsuchi has been wondering about the capital of the Imperial Kingdom without anyone watching her. It infuriated her to know that she was allowed to wander within the capital without anyone watching her movements. That was just daring, and it sent the wrong message to her. As far as things stood, she was an enemy of this kingdom, and yet she was allowed to leave the Crystal Palace without anyone guarding her. It seemed like they were sending her a message of that she was not a threat to be supervised, or that they knew she couldn't do anything. What these people were doing was practically allowing a thief into their home, and then allows him to wander off without any form of security to keep him from doing anything he wasn't supposed to do. It could be that she just wasn't able to sense anyone who was shadowing her movements. There could be people who just couldn't be detected. However, Kuretsuchi liked to believe that she would know if someone was shadowing her movements. If there was someone within this kingdom who could avoid her senses, then that wasn't a good thing. One thing Kuretsuchi was positive about was that the security of this place was tight. She felt isolated within this place, there was no one she could speak to, and any attempt to form contact with the outside has resulted in failure. Somehow, she was cut off from the people she left outside the walls of the capital. No wonder they allowed her stroll around as she pleases. The fact that she couldn't contact anyone from the outside frustrated Kuretsuchi, even so when there was no one she could speak to. The place that felt like a prison was the Crystal Palace. The guest quarters within the place were made in such a way that it was deathly silent. What happened within the walls of her given quarters stayed within, nothing got out. Even though there was ruckus in front of her door, she wouldn't hear a thing. Yes, the inside of her quarters made her feel like she was trapped in an unnamed island. The air outside the palace was bearable. No, it was in fact much more lively. Though she hated admitting that the place was good to its people and looked happy, she couldn't deny the fact. Kuretsuchi tried looking hard for something that would make everything look as an illusion. Evil deeds were often covered a thick cloud of happiness. The streets could be filled with happy people during day, and by night, vultures of all kinds could be creeping out of their burrows to venture about, searching for prey. Perhaps the thought that a man she didn't like could lead such a happy nation infuriated her to no ends. Perhaps it was the fact that the leadership of this country did much more for their people other than her grandfather did for his people. This leadership was not filled with injustice and full of greedy fools who only wanted to become rich. The leadership of this place was actually made of good people. It sickened her to even admit it. So much she just wanted to run back home and crawl into her bed and lie under the comfort of her sheets. Perhaps then her stomach would settle and she would forget this overwhelming nightmare. What had infuriated Kuretsuchi much more was the fact that Naruto had the guts to stand her up for 3 days. She didn't demand to meet with him, she had politely requested to speak to him, and yet for 3 damn days she's been wandering about without a word from him. The only person who was giving her anything was Gurren, but Kuretsuchi got the feeling that the woman didn't like her very much. Perhaps she was thinking she'd come to steal her emperor. Such a thought was ludicrous. Heaven would spit out rain for all eternity if she suddenly birthed romantic interest in someone like Naruto. The 4th day arrived, and the emperor had found it in his grace to speak to her. What Kuretsuchi did know was that Naruto didn't come down here that often. He obviously spent much of his time at the sky, in the comfort of his palace. No doubt today was the day he'd woken up in the left hand of his bed, and so he decided to come down here and dwell in the presence of lowly humans. Yay, right. Kuretsuchi snorted in thought as she was being led towards the throne room. She expected the walls of the place to be painted with gold since all imperial palaces wear gold like a clothing. But in this place, there was none of it. In all the arrears she'd seen, there was no gold anywhere. Aside from the crystals, which came from Gurren's ability, there was nothing, other than the red and dark blue colors that painted the walls of the palace. She reached the large halls of the throne room. The man escorting her didn't enter with her, he simply directed her inside before leaving her alone. When she entered, there was no one inside. The throne, still no gold on it, it was completely made of crystals, but the color was dark blue, was empty. The granddaughter of the Tsuchikage nearly vented her frustrations by rushing over to the throne and kicking it. He was said to have called her here, and yet he was going to make her wait. Hasn't she waited enough already? Before Kuretsuchi could explode, Naruto waked into the room. His attire was still as he'd been wearing recently. The truth-seeking balls just weren't with him, and so was his shakuho. He wasn't blonde anymore, Kuretsuchi thought. Well, recent reports have been saying he wasn't blonde anymore. Black seemed to be the theme about everything from him. She'd expected him to be wearing a golden crown to show his status as emperor, yet he had none of it. Kuretsuchi stared deep as he walked towards her, unblinking. The footsteps seemed gentle. In fact, he wasn't even making a sound as he touched the floor with his feet. Perhaps it was because he wasn't wearing any shoes, his feet were both adorned in bandages, and the soft fabric that covered the floor silenced everything. Naruto stopped just in front of the black-haired woman, he was just inches away from her. Her body had now grown tense, yet her eyes still stared at him with unwavering confidence and determination. He said nothing, but looked amused at her stance before he just walked past her. Kuretsuchi swirled around to follow him with her eyes. She sent a glare at his back, not even a hello after making me wait for this long, she drawled out. It wasn't intended to be loud enough for Naruto to hear, but he heard her nonetheless. Naruto didn't stop, but Kuretsuchi was positive he heard her. He finally sat down his throne, and faced her calmly. This is my house, I am royalty in here and you are a guest. Isn't it customary for guests or anyone for that matter to greet the owner of the house when he returns? The words left his mouth rather smoothly, no trace of any anger or anything to signify his displeasure with her words. Kuretsuchi glared, but didn't comment on it. She was here for peace talks. Getting worked up about everything wouldn't be good at all. Even though Naruto was sort of right, she wasn't going to bow before him. Screw the fact that he was an emperor. She was Kuretsuchi, the granddaughter of the Yondaime Tsuchikage and was in line to become the Godime Tsuchikage. She wasn't going to simply bow to anyone, just for the sake of it. She had her pride and dignity. No way was she going to throw it out of the palace because she was standing before Naruto. I thought you were not going to come down here. If today had passed without anything, I would have just left, Kuretsuchi said, changing the subject. Despite her dislike of the man she was speaking to, she still held her composure and spoke in a controlled manner. Guren is the prime minister of this country. You're supposed to speak to her since she handles not only internal affairs but also external affairs that relate to this kingdom. Naruto responded with a calm tone, yet kept a firm stare at the woman before him. She told me that, but I wanted to speak to you directly. I doubt she would have solved our matters, Kuretsuchi spoke in a firm tone. Though his stare was beginning to unsettle her, she still maintained her composure. You are downplaying Guren's position as prime minister and disregarding the order of things, Kuretsuchi. You don't request audience with the emperor without talking whatever you wish with the prime minister. The emperor should be sought after or for things that are beyond the minister's pay grade. Naruto stated, a bit sternly. However, since I don't wish for any future conflicts with Iwagakure, and would rather not be entangled in battles that don't entertain me, I'm forced to permit this. Well, that wasn't expected. Still, Kuretsuchi wasn't going to apologize. I wasn't aware things were done like that, and that was all she said. She did note he wasn't apologizing for making her wait. Since he wasn't apologizing, she was also not going to do it either. Naruto stared at her for a few tense moments. He then spoke, I know what you want, so spell it out. That just made things difficult. How was she going to put things now since he put it like that? Did he just do that on purpose just to make her nervous or just to see how she would handle the pressure? His expression gave away nothing, other than looking at her expectantly, waiting for her response. Just before she could respond, Naruto's look became a bit amused at watching her struggle in her thoughts. Kuretsuchi didn't hold back a glare at his behavior. I will make things easy for you, he said. You wish for peace between Iwagakure and the Imperial Kingdom. You do not wish for things to reach a point where there will be a battle. However, with this desire, you also do not wish to be kneeling before me. Kuretsuchi nodded. I only want to discuss things in a more equal ground. I care for my village, and I'm not stubborn as my grandfather. I wish for the tensions to end, though, it appeared that the tensions were only in Iwagakure. I don't want anything like what happened to Konoha happen to Iwagakure. What happened to Konoha happened because I had some matters to deal with it. I have no desire to attack any village. I've grown tired of trampling down on weak shinobi, and I'm not that bad of a person to seek destruction without a cause. Kuretsuchi nodded, she would take his word. The emperor wasn't the one to be subtle. I'm willing to do anything to assure you that I'm serious and have no intentions of starting trouble with you. I'd even go as far as offer my hand in marriage, to you, to keep things peaceful between Iwagakure and this country. Naruto raised a brow at her words. Marriage. Oh, I forget such a thing can be used to form bonds and ensure that connections between two villages stand in a peaceful way, Naruto mused loudly before standing up from his throne. He walked up to the silent woman. Don't sell yourself like that woman. You obviously dislike me, and wouldn't think twice of assassinating me. I have no desire to force things over. As long as you keep your end, I won't do anything. Kuretsuchi felt her insides twist. It felt like he was rejecting her. She'd offered herself to him, and yet he'd rejected her like she was a piece of rotten meat. Do be insulted, if you offer yourself to me who will lead Iwagakure. I see you becoming Tsuchikage soon, very soon. I also have no interest in making you submit to anything. Now return to Iwagakure, plan things over and return with Onoki. We will discuss things then. However, if you wish to cross me, I'll erase your existence, Naruto said smiling. You wouldn't believe he'd just threatened someone. Now be on your way to your grandfather. My other guests have arrived. Just then, two people entered, Sasuke and Nagato. Kuretsuchi nodded. I'll contact you after I've spoken to my grandfather. She left the room without saying anything further. Naruto returned to his throne after Kuretsuchi made her exit. Both Nagato and Sasuke walked a bit closer to the throne and stood in silence before Sasuke spoke. I was starting to think you didn't want to see me, the Uchiha spoke in an even tone, looking straight at the emperor. He had been here for 2 days straight, and the former blonde had yet to speak with him. He only spoke to Gurren, who seemed to be aware that he was coming. It wasn't much of a surprise that Naruto would know he was coming to the capital. Naruto felt tempted to question if that was how one addressed a king, but he shrugged it off. This was definitely the work of Kagaya's personality. The woman was of nobility, and given her status as a princess, she liked being treated as she was, a princess. I had important things to deal with, how so like Naruto to make one feel like what one had to say was nothing of importance. You're uncertain of the future since I seem to be in the center of it all, hence your presence here. Sasuke nodded. I have a lot of questions that I must ask. But most of all, I'm worried about the future that will greet us after all that has happened. You have the capabilities to shaping the world in any form you want. So, I want to know if you're an enemy or an ally. Nagato remained quiet. This was an interesting start of things. He wasn't expecting the raven-haired Uchiha to be so bold in front of the emperor. Perhaps it was because the man wasn't scary as he was before. Ho. Interesting, Naruto started before standing up. He walked over to the two men before him. He looked at Nagato. I will give you my second eye. You'll be in possession of it until you've succeeded in the path you've decided to take. Although it is only my left eye, it should be enough. What happened to my eyes? Nagato asked, speaking for the first time. Naruto had said he would give him his eyes. But now he was saying that he was going to give his eyes. I got overexcited and made Madara disappear, Naruto stated in a simple manner, like it wasn't much of a big deal. Sasuke snorted. He was there when Naruto did it. And Madara was just beside him when Naruto turned him to ash. But my eye will do. Nagato shook his head. As long as it will be enough, I won't complain, he said. Naruto nodded. You will be out for 72 hours. Your body spent much of time in that pathetic condition and to be able to move freely, and for those Uzumaki genes in you make you live a long life, I have to restore your body to a perfect condition. I wasn't able to completely revitalize you after I brought you back from the dead. Naruto then touched Nagato on his chest and the man disappeared. A clone of his was waiting for the man in his other home. The clone would do the operation and up there was where no one would be able to bother Nagato while he recovered. The silent atmosphere would also do well for the god of Omegakure. With the silence, he would be able to think clearly, without anyone influencing his thoughts. The emperor then turned to Sasuke. Whether I'm to be your enemy or ally remains your choice. It depends much on how you plan to deal with things from now on. On the outside, you look to be cleaning the world of its evil by imprisoning criminals who are roaming freely around the world, Sasuke stated calmly, staring back at Naruto. That is indeed correct, Naruto admitted before returning to his throne. For the next few years, I'll live. However, if this world is about to be changed, I will not be the one to do it. It isn't that it is beyond me, I'm just not the right person to change the world. Although much of this world disgusts me, I have no desire to create the perfect world. Well, that wasn't entirely true. If you want to know whether I'll be an enemy or ally, go to Sunagakure, or Kurigakure to seek answers. Mei and Gaara's world of desire is alike. The world that those two desire, is the world that my power will help create and protect. Sasuke waited until Naruto settled down on his throne. I didn't think you'd be the one to follow other people's ideals. Naruto never liked to dance to anyone's music. Yes, he even admitted it himself. He doesn't follow anyone's rules, he sets his own rules and follows them. His thought inability to follow other people has led him to believe that it has something to do with his abundant pride and ego. Naruto deemed himself to be above all humans. What would that make of him if he followed other people? It does appear that way, Naruto said, looking thoughtful. But that is not what it is in reality. I won't explain anything about that. I'd like to see the Uchiha clan restored, though. Can't you restore it? Sasuke asked with a raised brow. Naruto was Uchiha just like him, he should be able to restore the Uchiha clan. Well, that would be if the black-haired wants to. He thought the emperor would help with the restoration since he had the same blood as him. Naruto shook his head. I forget that you don't know everything. But it is within possibilities to birth Uchiha children. He possessed Senju and Uchiha DNA, as well as Uzumaki. But even possessing the DNA, he wasn't sure if both DNAs would pass on to his children for them to become like him. While it may be possible for them to possess both DNAs, the Rinnegan wasn't something he believed would be passed on. It was also a possibility that his children will have neither Senju nor Uchiha DNA within them. He possessed both DNAs, but his evolution had caused both DNAs to fuse and create the original gene that formed both clans. What do you mean, Uchiha children? Sasuke questioned in a deep tone, looking deep into Naruto's eyes, trying to understand the meaning of his words. There was a deep message between those words and he just couldn't figure out what it was. It is nothing to concern yourself with. Naruto responded in a slight dismissive tone. Tell me, Sasuke, what would you do if my kingdom turns out to be what you hate for this world, and something that is contrary to your ideal world? If more than anything, Naruto was merely curious. He was certain that Sasuke would attempt to do something about it if they were to become enemies. But given that he is yet to see him as an enemy, it means that the Uchiha holds no grudges for his actions towards Konoha. Well, despite Konoha being his home, Sasuke didn't hold any strong love for the former great hidden village. What I can, the Sharingan began to spin and then morphed into the eternal Mangekyo Sharingan. As Uchiha, I should be able to kill you. I may not be able to do it now, but I know the key will be my eyes. You're not invincible to every technique of the Sharingan. Ho! You are rather bold to declare something like that before me. I could kill you now, and be done with. A smile was on Naruto's face when the words escaped his throat. This was some sort of entertainment to him. The fact irked Sasuke greatly, but he remained calm. I know you won't do anything. You don't see a threat in anyone that is weaker than you. You forget something, power alone doesn't do it. You can be outsmarted and fall into a simple trick that will see you trapped in a prison where your power will not save you. The confidence was just seeping out of Sasuke like drool flowing out of a sleeping beauty. You're basically telling me that I'm arrogant, and this arrogance will eventually be my downfall, Naruto stated rather calmly. The Sharingan holds many mysteries, and can do many abilities. Fuinjutsu is also very capable. It is the only thing that can keep me down. However, you need both to actually threaten me. The Emperor paused for a moment before he continued. Sasuke, do you really think I don't know this? Do you really believe that I would be stupid enough to be caught in Fuinjutsu? Let me tell you, I've studied the art of sealing, and I tell you, I know what it can do. I know you, and I know that your knowledge of the Uchiha eyes isn't compared to mine. I'm not saying you don't know, Sasuke said, smiling a bit. You know, you just ignore the threats. The fact that there was a warning sign on the door didn't stop Naruto from entering. No, he ignored the warning signs and walked in. It was always like that with him, he didn't adhere to warnings put by other people. So you think in one of these days, if I become your enemy, you're going to be standing behind these threats, and they might actually be of trouble, Naruto stated, rather than question. You seem rather confident that you can do it. That is because I am, Sasuke responded firmly. Now tell me, Naruto, was it really necessary to divide Konoha like that? I mean, you've broken the village into two and banished those people from their homes. Wasn't destroying Konoha enough? Though I have no love for those people, I do think you were somewhat vengeful in your actions despite saying otherwise. If it was revenge other than purifying those people, then you're more cold-hearted than I thought you were. Well, I'm not complaining about anything. But still, did you really have no thought of revenge? Sasuke, everything became still. Sasuke felt his skin tighten at the tone of the man calling his name. His thoughts came to a halt and the sole objective his mind prioritized was to listen and understand what Naruto was saying. I've indulged you long enough. Leave before I find you to be a sore to my sight. The words left Naruto's lips rather smoothly. Whether he'd overstepped some boundaries, Sasuke wasn't going to wait around to find out. He had one more question before leaving, though. What of that man? What part is he to this kingdom? That man could only be Nagato. He is a man who wishes for peace. Perhaps he may be the one who finds stable peace for this world. He may even succeed me as emperor one day. Nagato had a strong life force due to his Uzumaki heritage. The man was bound to live a long life. Given the long lifespan that man was going to live, Naruto had decided the man would take charge over him after some time. If he does have children, then they would take over from him, Nagato, not from him, Naruto. I see. Sasuke turned around to leave. His head held high. Then I'll speak to him once he recovers. Naruto leaned a little to the left, placed his left hand on the armpit of his throne. He then rested his left cheek on the left hand's palm. He watched Sasuke calmly, as the raven-haired Uchiha left his sight with his head held high. Once the Uchiha was out of his sight, Naruto closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them, Samui was standing in front of his throne, eyes fixed at him with her hands folded atop of her bust. You're acting like a child, she said in a monotone voice that left no evidence of her thoughts about his behavior. She wasn't asking him a question either, she was merely stating a fact. What gives you that idea? Samui didn't respond, not before she walked over to him. She went to his right side before leaning against the throne while standing. Kuretsuchi, you could have handled things differently. You made her wait just so you could see how she would react to it, and you don't really need anything convincing to be of no enemy to Aiwa. You could have just told her to speak to Gurren so they could talk things through. You only made things uneasy for her for your amusement and you don't really want to talk to Onoki, yet you're making Kuretsuchi bring him here anyway. The fact that Sasuke brought up your actions towards Konoha didn't make you mad. No, you only made it appear that way to see his reaction, and you just wanted him to leave, but you just didn't want to tell him to leave in a nice way. I'm also curious why you're giving Nagato your second eye, the eye Madara had stolen. You could have given him Hagoromo's power, which you took from Sasuke. I'm led to believe that you still have it in your possession. Samui watched Naruto carefully as he absorbed all her words. She had no problems with his behavior. Regardless of what he did, before her eyes, Naruto will always be Naruto. She had known that he was a little childish, despite often calling most people children. I've always been like this. I wouldn't call it being childish, but it is alright. Naruto responded without surprise. If I don't do things this way, I'll become bored rather quickly and I don't know what I'd do if I became bored with this life. Well, you could always get more involved in the daily responsibilities of your country, Samui suggested looking at the former blonde at the corner of her eyes. If he became involved more than he would always have something to keep him busy. He wouldn't lack any form of activity to do. Naruto shook his head slightly. I'd rather not, he said. Why are you watching me anyway? Samui shrugged. I was bored at Kumo since Asama has been sulking for the past days. You also aren't bothering me with anything to do, she said. What is next then? My marriage to Mei, Naruto responded. Things with Yugao are in a bad situation and I don't want to fix them. You're only saying that because trying to work things with Yugao will require that you make sacrifices, Samui said, shaking her head. He made it sound like he just didn't want to fix things, but that wasn't the truth. Believe what you want, Naruto said with a shrug. How do you suppose we planned this wedding with Mei? I don't know, Samui said. You're rather cold, Naruto. How can you ask me about this subject when I think I should be the one to marry you since I know you better than the Mizukage? Naruto shook his head and stood up. Whether she was being serious or not, he wasn't going to indulge, not now anyway. He had more things to worry about. He faced Samui for a moment before turning his heels. Walk with me, he said. Samui followed Naruto from behind without saying a word. New Konoha, regardless of how much they tried to adjust and make this a little of their old home, it just wasn't working. The mind and senses were already accustomed to the warm breath Konoha always breathed. But this new air was different, it wasn't anything like Konoha. How could they forget their beloved home? How could this place be like their former home? It may look like the old Konoha, but it was an entirely different thing. Even a 5-year-old child can tell that much. Not everyone was excessively furious about losing the home they'd grown up at. The new surrounding was welcomed by some, and hated by many. The old cloth needed to be replaced, even if it wasn't worn out. Well, it was no longer usable after what Naruto did to it. Shikamaru was a little indifferent to the whole thing. He wasn't complaining about the new village. The mistake he would make while in this new home would be comparing it to the old and trying to live like it was still the old. This was their new home, not the old, and as such, he believed to accept this place and be able to live freely, one had to see this as a new cloth to wear. Everything was different, everyone was now different. Most people were bitter, and getting drunk often. The wells of alcohol were running low because almost everyone was a drinker these days. The mood around the village was somewhat gloomy, and it was depressing to walk around the streets. People just didn't have the same smiles they used to have back in their old village. It was only a matter of time though. Eventually, they would realize that being bitter wasn't going to do them any good. Yes, being bitter was only going to leave them shallow and miserable while Naruto danced happily on his throne. Being happy within the village wasn't doing Naruto favors, but it was doing themselves a favor by accepting the reality and moving on. No one would deny them their right to be angry. It was reasonable that they be angry. But allowing their anger to get in the way of their happiness would only lead to the fall of this village. If people chose to be happy, this village would grow again and prosper. But if all that rang within their temples were thoughts of murder, nothing would be accomplished, and in a few years, this village would fall. Shikamaru sighed as walked up to his friends. They were sitting together in a group at their stamped spot and hiding place. The place was nothing but a small clearing in the middle of a large forest, the new forest of death. We've been waiting for you, Shikamaru, typical of Ino to say something like that upon his entrance, even though he wasn't late. Shikamaru sighed, again. Well, some things will never change, he thought looking around the group, minus Sasuke. Give me a break, Ino, the Nara said sitting on Choji's right side, completing their new circle of friends. The new circle didn't include Sasuke since he seemed to be more focused on things high above them. It wasn't that the Uchiha didn't appear to think of himself as high above everyone else, but now, even a blind man can see that the Uchiha had put himself high above all things. He never even bothered to do anything with them. He was always busy about this and that. It wasn't a secret to everyone that Sasuke was often leaving the village to the Imperial Kingdom. Shikamaru was under no illusions that the Uchiha was working towards something to form a healthy relationship between Naruto's kingdom and New Konoha. As far as he was concerned, Naruto didn't give a dime about Konoha and wouldn't care to make sure everything was okay. Shikamaru works harder than all of us, Ino, Sakura said in response to her friend's typical choice of words. I think you should at least give him a break. While it may be something that no one would have ever thought possible, Shikamaru working harder than all of them, it was actually happening. Well, technically, Neji worked harder than all of them combined, but the Hyuga has always been a hard worker. Shikamaru on the other hand was a lazy bum who wouldn't mind cloud gazing for the rest of his troublesome life. It was actually a surprise to see him work as hard as he was. It was even hard when his father was pushing a lot of things on his shoulders and his mother didn't better things. Sometimes Sakura felt sorry for the poor Nara. Not even Tsunade would make her sweat as much as Shikamaru's mother forces him. Ino folded her hands across her bust. Well anyway, she said shrugging off Sakura's reasons. I was thinking we party tonight, Everything will be there, sake and any form of entertainment. My dad gave me permission to do whatever I want at the house. Everyone stared at the blonde for a few moments before Tenten spoke. Is it wise to party at this given situation? And what would be the reason to party? The situation didn't call for any celebrations. In fact, they should be grieving right about now. Their beloved home was destroyed for Christ's sake. It didn't matter if they were given a new home by the bastard who destroyed their old home, Tenten didn't give shit about that. The fact of the matter is that Naruto destroyed their home and drove much of Konoha's people insane. I think it will actually be a good idea. Hinata said without so much as stuttering. The party would lighten up the tense mood around them and often gloomy thoughts. Right about now, they could use something to soothe their grieving souls. Kiba nodded. Not only because Hinata thought it was a good idea. No, he was happy about it. The party would help him release some pent-up stress and perhaps help him sleep well without any thoughts of murdering Naruto. He'd been having those many thoughts recently, and if the fact that he often found himself laughing by himself, and if that wasn't disturbing enough, he actually saw himself sucking out the former blonde's blood like a vampire and take over his kingdom. I'm up for it, the Inuzuka said grinning. Why do you think it'll be a good idea, Hinata-san? Shino questioned, looking over at the former Hyuga heiress. He could guess what she was thinking, but to be accurate, he needed to hear it from her. Shikamaru answered for Hinata. The mood around the village is somewhat depressing, and that doesn't do well for our health. People are bitter and they've forgotten how to have fun because of everything that has happened. As troublesome as this is, I think it will be a good idea. If there is loud music and loud noises during the night, people will see that despite everything that has happened, they can still be happy. Wow, Shikamaru, always the calculating one, Ino said. Shikamaru looked evenly at Ino. Didn't you think of this when you planned for the part? Ino shook her head. No. I was only thinking about having fun. We haven't had some fun in a long time and it's getting to me. I can't stand the atmosphere within the village sometimes. Yes, sometimes Ino felt like leaving the village on a quest to find some happy place. Sakura shook her head looking at her friend. I'm in, she said. She wasn't exactly depressed about anything. Nothing much in her life had changed. She still woke up and helped at the hospital. Though the place was different, the routine she followed was still the same. As long as there is food, I'm in, Choji gave a typical response. Well, that was something that hasn't changed. We also have to find something to bind Lee. I know he's gonna end up putting alcohol inside his mouth, and I don't want to deal with him then, Tenten said, glaring at the green Jonin. Lee looked hurt by her words, but otherwise said nothing. If we weren't doing it at my house, I wouldn't have a problem with it. However, I would rather not have my house destroyed. If that happens, my dad is going to be furious with me, and he may even bear me from hosting any party. Ino said, smiling at the thought of something from the old village actually happening at this new home. You're a real daddy's girl, Ino, Sakura said quietly. I'm not. You can't deny that, Ino, everyone knows this. You've always been daddy's little girl, Shikamaru said rather plainly. A round of nods followed suit. Shut up, Shikamaru. Ino yelled, throwing an object that smacked the Nara straight on his face. Shikamaru hit the ground in a thud. Well, that was something to laugh about. Flashback, I've said that I want to live as a human happily. However, in this current form, I can't do any of that, Naruto said looking straight at Hagoromo. How do you suppose I'll make myself human? Hagoromo shook his head. He had ideas, but he wasn't going to give them to Naruto. I'm sure you already have something planned, he said. That I do, Naruto confirmed. However, it isn't anything original. Naruto paused for a moment, gathering all his thoughts. You used creation of all things ability to give your idea a form. The Rinnegan, control over yin and yang chakra, helped you give form to your imaginations. Just as you created you. Tools, I've also created tools of my own. I'm not human, but I do possess bits of humanity inside of me. In fact, the human parts of me form the basis of my being. Well, I was human in the beginning. Using the creation of all things, I can also separate the human part of my being and leave the inhuman part separated. Tell me, Hagoromo, when you look at me with your third eye, what do you? Naruto asked. A beast with 11 tails. This, you, that is sitting on the throne, is nothing but an illusion before the third eye, Hagoromo stated. He understood that the beast, was Naruto's true form. This form that Naruto showed was nothing but a human mask. His true form was a large 11-tailed beast that seemed to be exactly like the Jubi. Your third eye shows the truth in me. What you see is my real form, the form that isn't human. Naruto confirmed Hagoromo's thoughts. What I want to do is make this my real body, by separating my humanity from what you see. What seems to be the problem, then? Hagoromo asked, knowing that if there wasn't a problem, Naruto would have done what he wanted already. If I separate the human part of my being, my soul will also leave to dwell in the human body. The husk of me will turn into the holly tree without my soul. You see, without my soul, the power that will remain will run wild. It will be like the 10 tails running rampant all over again. So to manage this, my husk will turn into the holly tree. By turning myself into a human, I will forfeit my immortality and will eventually die. Avoiding death would be merging with the holly tree before I die, but I don't think I'll be able to regain this form again. I'll most likely be stuck as the holly tree until I've sucked all chakra from humans. If I don't want to be stuck as the holly tree until my existence withers away, I can forget about being human and continue as I am. However, as I continue to take away chakra from humans, my existence will grow too powerful for this world to handle and I will lose my form if I don't escape to another world. Possibilities of becoming whole again after fusing with the holly tree were low. It was something that even he didn't understand. Naruto had thought he would be able to combine all parts of him after his time as a human was over and return to this state, but things didn't appear to work in that way. However, if he was able to somehow contain his inhuman part from going berserk, he could still become what he was. Keeping his inhuman part in his core dimension wouldn't do it, it would only make it unstable after some time because of the massive outpouring of power. Sealing that part of him into the moon was an option. But Naruto didn't want to do things in the same way as Hagoromo did. The only timeline of events that would follow would be the one that he told the sage and nothing more or less. Hagoromo was silent for a few moments. This revelation changed everything, and depending on Naruto's answer, it would change he viewed Emperor. Given all that was said to him, he could understand his successor quite well, even more if he offers the right answer to his question. What is your choice? Chapter 42 Inches Your Majesty, Hashirama called out as he walked within the throne room within the king's palace. The throne room was the same as the one in the Crystal Palace, their only difference was that this one had some lights put in, unlike the other one which had no lights. Entering into the hall, he saw the emperor sitting comfortably on his throne, head resting on the right hand, while the only visible eye, his left, stared into the empty space between them. The man was always like that for most times of the day. He didn't really deal with much, despite taking an active role as the emperor of the great imperial kingdom. Gurren still did much of the work as the prime minister of the kingdom, and other work was done by Nagato, who was the commander of all forces within the kingdom and a leader of the Rain country, not just the Omegakure. Once Nagato received the Rinnegan, he hadn't wasted any time in securing control over every town within the Rain country, and removed the daimyo of the country. Ultimately, that made him ruler of the Rain country. Of course, he'd done so under Naruto's orders since the emperor had done the same with this country, while it was still called the Sound Country, a name given to it after it was seized by the dead manipulative snake, Orochimaru. The kingdom only expanded since the Rain was part of it. More to that, the kingdom became the most populated nation over the past 2 years, yet the emperor still had the time to spend most times of the day like this. Hashirama didn't have a problem with it though. For someone who had installed such a dynasty and whose sole name carried the empire to what it was, he deserved to deal away with trivial matters. Why should the emperor deal with little things when they could do everything in his place? What have you brought me, Hashirama? Naruto's calm voice questioned the man who was now on one knee while a bound shinobi was lying on his right side. The emperor's eye was only looking at the shinobi rather than his underling. Another one attempting to infiltrate the capital, Hashirama responded, glaring down at the man, Kiba, who was struggling to be free from his shackles. It wasn't the first time that the Jonin from Konoha attempted to infiltrate the kingdom in order to assassinate the emperor. The capital had grown so much that now it had become far larger than any other village. The walls had been built by Naruto were now just branded as the inner wall. More buildings had been rapidly built outside that wall just after the destruction of Konoha. Of course, with a large population, it didn't make it easy to keep everything tight like they used to. It was possible for spies to enter the village, but extremely hard to penetrate through the inner wall, which accommodated all important figures within the empire. It wasn't to say that no one was able to cut through into the inner wall. Every now and then one managed to get in, as they were thousands of people who go in and out through the 5 gates of the inner wall. In cases where one managed to enter, they had to deal with this kind situation. He didn't go far, but with each attempt, he takes a step closer, Hashirama continued, while keeping his eyes at the bound Jonin. This isn't the only who attempts to take your life, Your Majesty. Incidents have been occurring recently where assassinations have become brave in their attempt to take Naruto's life. They were from all over the elemental nations. The power of the Imperial Rice Kingdom was just becoming great. No, it was just great. Even though they weren't winning any battles over the past years, no village could challenge them on its own, and Naruto didn't even have to take part in the fighting for the defeat of enemies. Perhaps what gave these people confidence was the fact that there was a rumor that surfaced 9 months ago. The rumor was that the emperor was no longer godly anymore and had become just normal, beatable. What could have incited the rumor could be that the Sky Palace had disappeared during that time. Even though the people of the kingdom had been told that as long as that thing existed, no enemy would do them harm, they didn't waver in the faith in their king. No one casted any doubt in Naruto's power, yet the enemies were starting to doubt. Of course, Naruto only sponsored these ridiculous thoughts by not taking action against foolish villages that were sending assassins after him. Kumo and Iwagakure were active participants in all these mess, and didn't look like they were going to stop until Naruto was killed. Konoha has been oddly quiet in the matter, as it has been focusing on rebuilding and amassing its strength, at least that is what the rumors were saying. I see, Naruto simply said, not at all bothered by the threat to his life. While he may have stepped down a little with his god complex, he still didn't believe that anyone in this world could actually defeat him. He may no longer be the omnipresent sage, but he was still powerful. Hashirama frowned. It was always the same response the emperor gave whenever he came with such a matter before him. While the emperor may not be worried, it bothered him and he was bent on making a statement to the other nations. Your Majesty, you shouldn't allow such things to slide without punishment. The man in charge of security of the capital said, a bit strongly to let the message across. You think? Hashirama didn't know whether the man was being sarcastic or rhetoric. There were certainly times when he was like that, but you could never know. Only that blonde woman was the only who seemed to get it all times. She could probably even guess what he was thinking right about now. Perhaps if he called in the Empress, he would relent and allow him to take extreme measure. That woman was rather persuasive. Then again, the Emperor could be an immovable mountain when he wanted to be. Unbound him. I want to hear what he has to say to the Emperor. For all past 3 times the Jonin had made such attempts, he never bothered to talk to him, nor even spare it his time. He always instructed Hashirama to throw Kiba out of the borders of the country. Hashirama considered a few things for a few moments before relenting. What he did know was that Naruto wasn't requesting him. While on some occasions the easy-going emperor allowed him, Gurren, Nagato and Konan, especially Karen, to get away with a few things, there were some times when he didn't smile to them, and that was when he was sitting on that throne. As you wish, Heika. Once Kiba was freed, he stood still for a few moments. He glared at Naruto with so much hate that even surprised the emperor. Oh my, Naruto started, bringing in an amused look on his face, yet his posture didn't change. That kind of look brings back so memories, it certainly reminds me of that village I buried. Kiba growled. Look at his shit face, saying it so casually like he hadn't destroyed his home, the Inuzuka thought bitterly. It was an insult to him for Naruto, to speak of what he did to his former home so casually without any remorse for his actions, and it really enraged him to no end. You fucking bastard. I will kill you if it is the last thing I do. Before he could even move, Hisuke's katana slid through his back before it was returned to its sheath. Kiba stumbled forward a little, wincing as he did at the pain now on his back. I will not allow you to speak to His Majesty in such manner. Hashirama barked in a tone that threatened to cut the Konoha Jonin if he said something like that again. Kiba growled, narrowing his eye at the arrogant prick behind him for a moment. He looked back at Naruto, whose amused facade was now a distant memory. Shrugging off the pain, he dashed forward, straight at the emperor, who didn't move an inch. But he wasn't allowed to get anywhere as Hisuke pulled him back by his right shoulder, twisting him. He followed this up by a knee to the gut. Once the Jonin had bended a little while clutching his aching gut, Hisuke grabbed Kiba by the back of his head and slammed him down the floor by his face before stepping over him. Heika, allow me to execute this fool. That would be the best course of action, Naruto said, appearing thoughtful. Hisuke knew that he wasn't exactly thinking about anything, he merely gave that look to give you to illusion that he was thinking about your request, but the answer wouldn't be what you want. Send him to the pit since it seems like he doesn't want to talk. Release him after a month, if this happens again, don't come to me, do as you please. But that didn't mean that the answer wouldn't be satisfying. He knew well enough when Naruto said he could do what he wanted, it was as he said, he wasn't going to change his mind. Hisuke knew it too well that unless something happened, Kiba would return, and this time, he would execute him. Of course, they did nothing like public expectations as they did nothing but influence violence, which was something that Naruto didn't want. Gurren though, still disapproves of the idea. If she was the one doing them, she would probably mutilate him with her crystal in front of everyone who wanted to watch, while her expression became sadistic. The look was something that Hisuke had only seen once from that woman, and that time, he became a bit fearful of her. That look didn't chip happy to his spine, and with all the training Naruto made her do during the first 6 months of his time as an active king, she'd become really powerful. I will see to it, Hisuke stated, and picking up Kiba, but before he could leave, the before-mentioned woman walked into the hall. Hisuke couldn't stop himself from staring at her, she was 5 to 6 months pregnant. The thing that had the guys back at HQ making bets was who the father of her child was. It was a secret that had become a mystery to everyone on who the father was. Bets were being made on 3 likely suspects who spent much time with her before it became apparent that she was pregnant. But Gurren wasn't telling one anything, and she did well to hide the identity of the man who knocked her up. Some even entrained the idea that she was carrying the child of the emperor, but no one could prove it, and since the emperor showed no affection to any woman, it was a hard case to make and no one really said it aloud in fear of being melted by the empress. Such a rumor was blasphemy in the ears of the empress. Hisuke didn't believe such a rumor though, he'd done a search into Gurren's life and found 2 men who were the likely suspects. He'd even laughed when he heard of it. Out of all his men, no one other than him knew Naruto better, and he would know if something had happened between him and Gurren. Besides, he overheard the empress complaining about Naruto. The matter was that she had to practically rape him for them to make love. Naked women could be thrown at him, and he wouldn't even react. How could such a man engage in a sexual act with another woman other than his wife? Moreover, if there was some truth in it, the empress would have been pregnant already. Naruto's oldest child would become king of the empire and a woman like her wouldn't permit another woman to carry her man's child. If it wasn't even for His Majesty's quick intervention, Samui would have been dead already. The woman was very possessive when it came to the king and didn't like when things were kept from her. What he would believe is that there was something going on between the emperor and that woman, he favored her more than anyone and spent more time with her than his own wife. Perhaps a factor that made it so was the fact that the woman was exiled from her village once it was discovered that she was His Majesty's friend. Wasn't forgiving, and if it wasn't for Yugito, he would have probably chosen for her to be executed. Well, the emperor wouldn't have allowed that happen. Is there something on your mind? Gurren demanded, looking at Hisuke with a hardened look on her face. She didn't at all like the look on his face, and she'd repeatedly told him to stop sticking his nose to things that didn't concern him. No, Hisuke responded quickly. No one really wanted to piss off a pregnant, sadist woman, something like that would be inviting the chains of hell. Good, Gurren said. What is he doing here? The usual, Hisuke responded. I have to drop him to the pit. Emperor, Prime Minister, excuse me, he was gone with gusts of winds after those words left his mouth. Gurren took several steps towards Naruto before stopping at a safe distance. This is the first time you're punishing him, what changed? The emperor merely gave her a blank stare, telling her he wasn't going to respond to her question. Gurren sighed, and spoke again. I'm going to take some time off until I give birth. My doctor recommended it as my work is stressing and that affects the development of my child. Are you asking me or telling me? Both, Gurren responded a bit firmly, not cowering under his stare. She'd dealt with him long enough to know how to manage things with him, and she was going to leave this place with what she wanted. Who will be in charge while you're away? Naruto asked. He wasn't going to delegate anyone to fill the position. Besides, in all honesty, even when he knew that she was pregnant, he never expected her to leave her post. He's never trusted anyone to lead the empire other than Gurren. It has always been her running the show since its founding. Conan has agreed to do it since it is only temporarily, and she wanted some time away from Nagato. It wasn't much of a change since Conan was already the chair of the Empire's council. She already had experience in leading since she led AIM when Nagato was dead. There was no one who could do better than her. I see. She will arrive in a week. After then, I will request you take me to Uzu. Yukimaru was there studying under Karen, along with other children. The Uzumaki was teaching science and technology. No offense to you, but Uzu is the safest and most relaxing place I can be given my state. Aside from that, Uzu had defenses equipped to deal with anything. And the island was a destination for a holiday, and leisure, well, the coast part of it anyway. Naruto didn't comment on anything, his left eye merely closed as he spoke his last words to Gurren, appear before me when you want to leave. Gurren frowned. She knew she was being dismissed, but for everything that she's done for him, she expected more from him than hearing her out. Is that all you can say to me? Normally, she wouldn't have said anything. Perhaps it was the pregnancy that was making her do it. Naruto's blood-red eye opened slowly, the 6 blades clocked slowly for a few moments. You're not leaving today, the Emperor simply said before his eye closed again. The pit Hisuke threw a bound Kiba down a cold floor. They were underneath the Special Corps HQ where Naruto had created an abyss-like prison. The prison was used to hold criminals who had wronged the Empire, or those who escaped execution. In more simple ways, the pit was used to hold the dangerous of criminals. It was a maximum security prison that offered no chance of escape, no light, there was nothing but eternal darkness within the pit. It wasn't to say that other prisons weren't maximum security. It was just that even if someone like Orochimaru had been thrown inside the pit, he couldn't escape. The commander-in-chief of the Special Corps looked at the thorn on his side, Kiba. The Jonin was becoming a lot more troublesome recently, and it really bothered him that His Majesty took no appropriate action against the kind of foolishness that people like this one committed. He only soothed his soul in the thought that he dealt with others severely when His Majesty wasn't involved in the decision-making. Things were just different when it came to Konoha. Though, he was certain that Gurren wouldn't waste time in executing the fool if she had been the one to catch him. That woman showed no mercy to enemies of the Empire. He understood that killing the fool would spark more incidents like this into happening in regularity and more tensions would grow between the Empire and the fallen village and leaves. The calmness that existed now was nothing but calm before a disastrous storm. Yes, they knew that other villages were amassing their armies, training really hard to strengthen themselves in preparation for war. Even the likes of the small villages were preparing for war against the Empire. Hisuke wasn't worried about it though, he just wanted to happen soon so that they could end it quickly and move on to greater things. Perhaps it is then that His Majesty will rule things by himself and ensnare other nations under his command. It wasn't that he favored tyranny over all things. Peaceful resolutions haven't been occurring around all nations over the past couple of years, but nothing was happening. There was little success, just not enough to quench all thoughts of war against the Empire. Hisuke sighed and affirmed his stern gaze at the Konoha Jonin. I don't even know why your Hokage permits you to leave the village even when he knows what you're going to do. I've grown tired of your foolishness and I do tell you, soon His Majesty will grow tired of you and you will turn into ash. Kiba snorted. Yay right, he said sarcastically. If His Majesty could do it, why hasn't he done it already? I will tell you why he can't do it, he doesn't have the balls. Kiba was certain that his time was running out, but as long as there was time left on his watch, he wouldn't stop attempting to murder that bastard. He got encouragement from the fact that with each attempt, he grew closer to the throne, and he knows, if he does end up killing that fool, he would end up sitting on the throne and install himself as the emperor. The thought was deliciously pleasing and looked within his reach. But he had to kill that bastard first. Killing Naruto was all he cared about for now. Kakashi will probably give him hell over his actions, and his mother would most likely strip him naked and whip his ass until Akamaru begs for her to stop, but that won't stop him. He was already in trouble enough, but he had the support of other people, and even though that Kakashi always gave him a tongue lashing over a failed attempt to kill Naruto, he never actually did anything against him to show that he was truly against the idea of ridding of Naruto from this beautiful world that didn't need demons such as him. Hisuke blinked a couple of times when Kiba's words fully registered inside his head. He then burst out laughing, hysterically. Naturally, Kiba seethed at being laughed at like that after saying those words. What's so funny? He demanded while sending murderous daggers towards the man who dared make a fool out of him. It took a few moments, but Hisuke finally did calm down from his laughter and wiped a few tears from his left eye. His expression changed quickly, and turned into a hardened look. A second later, his right feet stomped onto Kiba's gut, making the Inuzuka grind his teeth in pain. His Majesty is many things, but spineless. No. Your pathetic excuse for a life means nothing to His Majesty. While I must give you some credit for your actions, do not mistake His Majesty's mercy as the lack of balls, fool. Kiba wasn't given more time to put on his retort because Hisuke then chose to drag him through the dark passages by his right foot. He could only muster out curses to the man who was dragging him like a dog. Well, it wasn't so bad since he liked dogs. But that wasn't the case. Let me go. Hisuke didn't stop until they reached a black door at the end of the passage. He pulled Kiba forcefully and slammed him into the door before speaking. You've never been to this place, so I will tell you this, even though you won't stay long until I pull you out, you won't enjoy the idea of returning here, ever again. Kiba was defiant. Do your worst. Unknown location. The world was turning into a state that Hagoromo had always feared it would when Naruto chose to become the emperor and install such a world. Yes, he might have been doing things without the use of force towards other nations, and his associates actually tried having peace talks with enemy nations, but the fear of the man was just too much for these people to accept any talk of peace. The empire was just too powerful that it could turn on anyone it liked at any given time and day. He knew that things were going to become messy again, and more bloodshed would arise in this world. When those people working with Naruto started their march of peace, he had thought that it would actually work and peace would be reached without kunai being plunged into the guts and hearts of men and women, but he was wrong to believe that. Peace talks had failed, and only because of Naruto and his kingdom. While he had to change his perception of Naruto as a person, he didn't believe that his existence was good for the world. It turned out that Naruto wasn't that much of a bad person as he'd first thought. His idea to have the cages dance on his palm had been put to rest so that a door for peace talks could be opened, and now that it has failed, he is most likely to turn things into his liking rather than those people's liking, and he feared that, at the same time, he was rather glad for it to happen as it would put an end to the gathering dark clouds that gave him all kinds of itches. I can't even do anything, Hagoromo thought bitterly. That was the hard part of it. No matter how much he tried to communicate with the living world, he couldn't, and Naruto no longer appeared before him since he pushed his sky palace into the moon, making it part of it. He was now trapped within the moon, watching the world as it marches towards that path of destruction. In the moon, no one could reach him, and he couldn't reach anyone. There would be no traces of his existence or parts of Naruto within the moon once his time ends in the shinobi world. There would be no Zetsu to write history about such events, in these days, Naruto kept some things to himself, while carefully making sure that nothing about the secrets of his existence was taken elsewhere into the ears of men. At least that was a good thing. Must you always blame him for the things that have happened, and for the direction the shinobi world is headed towards? A voice suddenly spoke, alarming Hagoromo, who thought he was all alone. Hamura. Hagoromo recognized the voice, and looked at his brother carefully, trying to see if he was the real thing or not. Who knew if Naruto had just made this image to screw with his mind? It is I, brother. Hamura said, displaying no emotion on his slightly stern expression. Hagoromo was silent for a few moments as he processed a few thoughts. He'd actually thought that his brother was no more. It has been thousands of years since they last spoke, and after everything, he didn't think his brother would still be living. What do you mean by, must you always blame him? His eyes were narrowed at the brother of his. We both love peace, hence the choice we made years ago to seal Mother away. Though we have been apart for so long, I still love peace and wholeheartedly against any action that is and will be similar to Mother's, Hamura started calmly. What has happened to the shinobi world? The cages are greedy, and shinobi are filled with nothing but fear and hatred, lust for power and revenge. Who do you think is the cause for all these, brother? Obviously, Hagoromo couldn't say that it was Naruto who had caused it all. Shinobi were cruel by nature and flawed. He sort of blamed Naruto for the current situation, but the underlying problem was deeper than Naruto. Things became screwed up in the first generation of shinobi, not with Naruto. All these started when he made that choice that led to brothers hating each other. It was his sons that gathered men to fight their own personal battles. It was his choice that led to his sons fighting each other. If he had made a different choice, things would have turned up differently. It wasn't time to blame himself either. What did his brother even mean by saying he always blamed Naruto for what the world has become? Sure, he did blame the emperor for shaping the world into what it is today. People outside his kingdom couldn't rest because of fear for his power and given his cold shoulder, as well as the unforgettable destruction of Konoha. One couldn't blame them for having uncertainty over the future with a man like Naruto still breathing. Even though he didn't do much, he was still alive, and it was only a matter of days before that man leaves the shadow of his throne and step into the light of the shinobi world, which he has been avoiding for the past years. If Hagoromo thought it carefully, technically, Naruto hasn't left his palace since he became human again. True, he made some appearance outside the palace, but the real him always stayed behind. It was almost like he was trapped inside the palace, but that wasn't the case. Naruto just didn't feel like leaving because it happens that the outside world is not interesting enough for him to grace it with his presence. Hagoromo cleared his thoughts and answered his brother's question. Shinobi have turned the world into what it is today. Other nations who aren't oriented to shinobi ways are able to live peacefully. The elemental nations are always embroiled into wars because of greed, hatred and the lust for power. Naruto still played a role in some matters, but he wasn't going to say it, for now at least. Even though you don't say it, I know you are thinking about it, Hamura said as though he was reading Hagoromo's thoughts. The sage frowned in turn, but said nothing. You have changed your view of Naruto because he gave peace talks a chance to bear fruit. That man has never had the desire to be a tyrant who reigns over the nations, but the situation will most likely turn his empire into a beast that will subjugate other nations and absorb them. Hagoromo nodded. The other cages have refused peace in favor of fighting someone who told them he wouldn't do anything unless provoked, and they know he will keep true to his word. But their fear of him cannot allow them to accept him, no matter what he does. In all truth, Hagoromo had actually thought that Mei and Gaara would succeed in uniting the world, but that didn't happen. The other cages focused on becoming stronger in order to deal with what they perceived to be a threat. They are provoking him now, and these assassins are doing nothing but poking him. Very soon, he will start acting and things will change forever after that, Hamura said. What he didn't know was whether they would change for the good or not. In this stage, one could never know, not unless Naruto made his first move. He was most likely waiting for this to happen, Hagoromo said a bit bitterly. He has the patience the size of his ego, and probably knew all attempts to unite the nations would fail. It will only be fun for him after they've rejected all peace proposals. Must you always assume the worst about him? Hamura asked, with a furrowed brow. He knew that his brother had some strong feelings towards the Uchiha, and he knew he couldn't say something nice about the emperor without cursing him in the same sentence. He hasn't given me much reasons to assume the good yet. You say he isn't that bad of a person, Hamura shook his head. Will you stop contradicting yourself, brother? Konoha Kakashi sighed as he looked at the streets of the fully reformed Konoha. They weren't as empty as they used to be when they first arrived at this new land, and they weren't as gloomy as they used to be. The more the days added, and more the people appreciated their new home, but that didn't mean that they'd forgotten the old village that greeted them each morning with the faces of the Hokages, no, not the least. The old Konoha would forever be within their hearts, no matter what happened. Things had changed a bit. The barrier that separated the inner walls with the outer walls had become non-existent, but the walls remained intact. They just continued to expand the village outside those walls and made it their home. Rebuilding what had been lost and getting people from outside to settle in was a lot harder job for the Hokage and those who worked with him. Sometimes Kakashi pitied Shikamaru because of the amount of work he had to carry out at the end of each day. No one worked harder than the Jonin, all things considered, including his laziness. Re-establishing Konoha's place within the elemental nations hadn't been any easy task since they'd lost their place as the strongest hidden village because of the destruction. Konoha had fought so many wars and lost cages, but they'd never been so exposed and weakened to the state in similar to the one Naruto left them in after destroying the village. What made it pathetic was that it had just taken one man to destroy the once great village, and he did so without sweating or even lifting his fingers. It was an embarrassment to them, but other nations understood it well. There was nothing they could do even though it was just one man. Luckily for them, and with Shikamaru's intelligence, they'd managed to get small villages to work with them. Over the past couple of years, while rebuilding, they'd been training shinobi from other nations. These shinobi would make part of the Konoha military force and were being trained by Tsunade, Jiraiya and Sasuke as well as his friend. The training wasn't short of anything that Guy and Lee did. Sometimes Kakashi even winced at Sasuke's and Tsunade's brutality when training their students. Given their mass army training, other people felt safe into moving into Konoha and now the village had become even stronger than before. While they plotted to dismantle Naruto's kingdom and strip it of its powers, they still kept some sort of a relationship with the kingdom. Sasuke did some high-paid missions for the kingdom while Shizune worked at the research facility in Uzu, and Sakura did go there at some times. There was no better facility than the one owned by the Imperial Kingdom and all kind of information was there. It was only a pity that the ruler of Uzu acted separately from the Imperial Kingdom, and there was not much information on the kingdom from the facility, but there was still a lot that benefited them in many ways. Given that faraway look on your face, is it safe to assume that Kiba is at it again? Obito stated as he walked into the office within the largest building in New Konoha. He could see the reflection of Kakashi's face on the window he was looking through and he'd pretty much guessed the look since he knew the only time the Hokage turned that way was when he was thinking hard. Kakashi turned around to face his friend. He nodded before moving on to take a seat behind his desk while Obito settled on one of the chairs in front of the desk. He isn't returning and he left about a week ago. I can now assume that he was captured and put into prison this time, the sixth Hokage stated, mildly. His mother was just here and gave me a nasty look. She almost lost her temper and bit me. Obito chuckled at that while shaking his head. She will do it for real if she hears you saying that, he said, clearly amused by Kakashi's attempt for a joke given the current situation they were facing. Kakashi merely smiled. It wouldn't be anything less I deserve, especially if something does happens to him, he said, a bit bitterly, betraying the smile on his face. Obito nodded, and chose not to spare the sixth Hokage any punch. Well, you did allow her son to attempt to kill Naruto even when you know he couldn't do it and would most likely be taken into custody one day. If you were actually serious in stopping him from doing anything rash, you would have stopped him before his first attempt. No one smart enough actually believed that Kiba could assassinate the emperor, but Kakashi was never that forceful in stopping him from doing it. Obito could remember the day Sasuke was told that Kiba had left Akamaru behind in pursuit of Naruto's head. The Uchiha had laughed so hard that he actually cried. Obito had never seen the stoic Uchiha laugh so hard and since then, he's never laughed like that. To Sasuke, nothing more was hilarious than the arrogant Inuzuka trying to kill the emperor. Obito knew well enough that Naruto couldn't be killed by Kiba, but it wasn't within his right to stop the Jonin from doing as he pleased. She will most likely kill me if something happens to him, Kakashi said casually, making Obito frown. Don't be so casual about your death, Kakashi, he lectured sternly. He knew well enough that his friend didn't want to fight Naruto but was forced because of the pressure from the villagers, Iwagakure and Kumogakure. The reason they even managed to amass a strong army was because of the awaited battle with Naruto's kingdom, nothing more and nothing less. Kakashi shrugged. We will all die one day, he said before focusing on the serious matter. But I do believe that since Kiba has been taken away, things are most likely going to get serious soon, which means we have to be ready for anything. Obito couldn't deny that Kiba was some sort of a messenger between the two nations. When he was thrown out of the rice, the message read, not yet, but now it read, soon. Have you received word from either Iwa or Kumo? No, Kakashi shook his head. They are being secretive in their dealings as always. They only forced their way through when they wanted to learn Konoha's position in the future battles, and since then, they've kept their doors closed and eyes close to their activities. Good thing even they kept a low profile when it came to inner dealings of the village. Everyone is keeping their guards to their chests, Obito said in a resigned tone. So much has happened since his return from the dead. While he had expected to burn in hell for all that he'd done, he'd been given a second chance to live again. He took the chance, but this world was in a shape and he couldn't treat it in the same manner as he did when he was still playing Madara. At least we already knew things would happen like this. But it doesn't change much, Kakashi pointed out the fact. Obito didn't deny it. The fact that they'd predicted that Iwagakure and Kumogakure would keep things tight while amassing their armies didn't change the fact that they still couldn't get all the information they wanted either of the village, and it was downright frustrating. I know, Obito frowned when the thought came. Kurigakure and Sunagakure still remain allied to Empire. Not to mention the ever-growing power Nagato has amassed for himself in the Rain Country. He wouldn't even be surprised if that man who still went on to call himself God chose to break away from the Imperial Kingdom given how powerful Omegakure has become. Both Konan and Nagato have become extremely powerful and that did them no favor. According to Sasuke, both Konan and Nagato possess portions of Naruto's power, and considering the fact that Naruto has never forced them to do his bidding, or tell them how to rule over Omegakure, I don't think they will ever betray him. Kakashi clearly had different thoughts to Obito. The letter didn't get into a debate about the matter though. Neither will Mei and Gaara, Obito added. But those two aren't our enemies. They've both assured me that they would rather be our allies than enemies, and wouldn't want to engage us in any battle. For someone who has seen so much, Obito knew that those words were cheap and you could never rule out anything in the shinobi world. Mei's marriage to Naruto meant that she was part of his kingdom and she was going to follow her husband, no matter what. Gaara was only going to do what he thought best for his village, and nothing else. Still, Obito left these kinds of thoughts to himself. Sasuke or Tsunade would say it better than he could. Obito sighed as he rubbed his temple. We have been fighting since we were just kids, Kakashi, he said. They were born in an era of wars, and ended up participating in the Third Shinobi World War. It was then that they lost things valuable to them, and he turned into the dark side, helped gladly by Uchiha Madara. Now, they've grown up, and still have time to plan for battles because one was indeed coming in the near future. When is it going to end? Kakashi didn't respond immediately, he took a thoughtful pose as he processed a few thoughts. The next battle will be our last, regardless of who ends up winning, he said. No matter what happened, the next was going to the last, there no longer will be any wars in this shinobi world. Let us just try to enjoy our lives a bit. Inwardly, Obito frowned. He couldn't do that, not without Rin. Kakashi was his friend and all that, but he wasn't Rin and no one could replace her. The fact that she wasn't with them meant there was a hole inside his heart, and he couldn't enjoy much with that hole still taking residence in his heart. How is the view from up here? A change of subject. Good, Kakashi added with a nod to emphasize. The civilian population has never been happy. Of course they're still ignorant of the outside world, but it doesn't matter since they won't get dragged into it anyway. Whether it was by choice or they were just fools, Kakashi didn't dwell much into it. The sixth Hokage preferred looking at the light side of things. They're in a different world than that of ours, Obito said. It is better to let them be fooled by their own ignorance as they will keep on smiling while we do what we must as shinobi. Keeping a clear head wouldn't be possible if they were breathing down their necks asking questions that didn't concern them. While they were hooked in their perfect little world, they could seek to correct things in the outside. Sasuke appeared, in a buzz of lightning, before Kakashi could offer his response. Looking at Sasuke's expression, Kakashi commented dryly, "You look happy," he said. "You think?" Sasuke responded in the same dry tone before settling down on the chair at Obito's right side. "How are things at your end?" he asked, looking at the man on his left side. Both were part of the Uchiha clan, and had become the strongest warriors for Konoha. Given that, they commanded Konoha's shinobi forces. Good, Obito stated simply. Sasuke nodded, before looking back at Kakashi. The Hokage beat him to a question though, how is Naruto doing? Of course, he still had some feelings for the son of his former sensei. Nothing would probably ever change that in this lifetime. Same as always, Sasuke said. Aside from chilling with the Mizukage when she visits, he doesn't do much other than sit inside his throne room. That isn't to say that it was he all does with his days, the emperor does other activities, it was just that relaxing and muted silence dominated his daily schedule. Were you successful? No, Sasuke frowned when responding to Obito's question. He bluntly said no. As far as I can tell, Naruto hasn't fought anyone since he battled Madara and me. He doesn't even train, even when he knows that there might be a war soon. The Uchiha cut a frustrated figure as he went through that explanation. No doubt it displeased him greatly that Naruto didn't appear to be taking things seriously. The mood was completely turned by that, but Kakashi didn't allow it to last for long. Enough about Naruto, he said standing up. Shikaku can handle things from now on. What do you guys say about having a few bottles of sake? At this time of the day, Sasuke asked the same question Obito would have asked. Kakashi merely nodded. A Megakure, at least no one ever lied by saying that finding peace was the easiest thing to do within this rotten world of shinobi. If someone had said otherwise, Nagato would certainly be cursing that man, while ripping his body into pieces for spreading outrageous lies. Shinobi could understand each other. Laughable. Shinobi couldn't understand a damn thing. Nobody understood his course outside of a Megakure and allies of the Empire. The rest of the world saw him as an enemy who sought to control the world, an enemy of needed to be destroyed. They didn't understand him, hence the foolish thoughts. He'd always thought that Jiraiya had been naive when he said that he wished for an era where shinobi could understand each other and form one mind, one objective. He couldn't understand other people, and so he believed no one would understand him. Even so, he gave the idea of working peacefully to unite the world and create peace, a second chance. His efforts hadn't been truly wasted on the notion, he had been fully focused on fortifying the Rain country and establishing a base of power while weeding out all enemies within. Pain didn't need much to say or to do to convince the people of a Megakure that he could give them peace, or that he was their savior. He'd already done what was needed of him. His people had unwavering faith in him and they trusted him well enough. Because of this, he was able to realize his ideal in them and provide the peace he'd promised. The rain was his, and as such, the people understood, unlike those out there. The village that never stopped raining had dried up its wells and gave the sun a chance to dance in the sky. His people could now stare at the moon and the stars during the night. The dark clouds that always hid their view had been removed. Of course, this did nothing but inject a new wave of happiness to the people. As peaceful as it was the rice country, it was also peaceful within the rain country. A Megakure wasn't his only concern, but every town with the rain country was his concern, and through working tirelessly, he'd brought peace upon the country. But it was still not enough. The world that surrounded his country was a corrupted smoke that flickered across the borders of his country, and its rotten stink reached all the way to the confines of his tower, and he felt disgusted by it. He couldn't stand the murderous intents that lurked within the shadows, he couldn't accept the world that glared with hateful intent at the peace within his home. As such, he hoped to liberate the shinobi world from its current leaders and shackles. A Megakure wasn't his at the beginning, but he liberated it from the hands of Hanzo and has now brought upon peace to the land. Its people revere his name as a god and his partner as their angel. Certainly, they've been nothing than heaven-sent beings to the country. Other nations would have to follow the same line as a Megakure. He'd given the thoughts of Mei and Gaara a chance, but nothing worked. Pain was going to do things his way, by the use of force. It didn't matter what anyone thought of the methods, and he wasn't going to concern himself with the inevitable objections of both Mei and Gaara. Both wouldn't agree to subdue these foolish cages who refused to back down despite not being threatened by anyone. A more interesting case would be what that man would think about the matter. So far, in all meetings they held, he only said one thing: do as you like. It wasn't the same for the rice country though. Over the years, he's taken more of an active role despite never leaving his palace. Regardless of what that man would think, Nagato was going to do things his way now. The Mizukage and Kazekage had their chance, it was only fair that he be given his chance to shape the world into what he wanted, a peaceful world. Nagato, Conan's voice pulled the Lord of the Rain country out of his thoughts. Nagato straightened his head to look at the blue-haired woman who was walking towards him, while he sat comfortable behind his desk in the confines of his tower. More problems have arisen. It wasn't anything surprising. The approach he took wasn't as peaceful as the approach the others were taking. He came across more resistance than anyone else. Regardless, he extinguished any flames that dared to burn the peace he'd created for this country. No one succeeded in disturbing his peace. While aim may be in state of peace, there were foolish people who dared attempt to rebel against the rule of pain, not because he was any hush or an evil slave driver, but simply because they sought to gain his power. Naturally, such foolishness was dealt with accordingly, and in a way that didn't show any weakness, but proved to all that he was indeed Kami. Where? That was all that needed to be known, and he would move ahead to deal with it without wasting time. The line across the border towards Kusagakure, Conan reported. Kusagakure was allied with Kanahagakure, and they gave them more problems than any other village. It was only the patience of Nagato that he hadn't reduced the village into a large crater. Nagato stood up. Let us go, he said. Conan waited until he took the lead before she followed him from behind. When do you think it will end? We've been fighting for almost all our lives. At least Omegakure had found its long-last peace, and Conan was going to do everything in her power to ensure that the peace remained, even if it meant facing over hundreds of enemy shinobi just to ensure that her shinobi remained unharmed. It will end, Conan, Nagato said calmly. We know another fight is inevitable, yet that man told us not to prepare the rain for war. The rice hasn't been preparing for war either. What do you think is that? No one is ever excited about war, even the younger generation who do not know what war is. Allowing them to live freely without installing the thought of another war breaking out soon enables them to live peacefully. The only reason they've so far been experiencing peace was because the weight of fighting a war hasn't been placed upon their shoulders. Still, the people of Omegakure wouldn't have problems in going on a war as they believed that they couldn't lose should they be led by their leader. Nagato nodded in acceptance of Conan's response. If the nations fight with all their fighting power, there will be countless number of shinobi who die in the war, and that will only cause more pain and hatred. The god of aim paused for a moment before continuing. I'm not sure how the emperor plans to fight this, but I know he isn't going to sacrifice himself. He's yet to live his life, and these couple of years has only taught all of us a great lesson. You think he allowed them to do as they pleased so that they can learn something from it? Conan asked with a furrowed brow. Maybe, Nagato said. But that man doesn't believe in learning through mere words. Experience is the best teacher. Words come cheap and aren't most likely to be believed, but your own experiences can never lie to you.